The sun cast long shadows across Sweetwater Creek as Clara Jenkins stood on the rickety porch of her father's failing ranch, her scarred face half hidden beneath the wide brim of her hat. The year was 1878, and at 23, Clara had long resigned herself to spinsterhood, knowing the cruel whispers that followed her through town scarred, homely, unmarriageable. The vicious wildfire that had claimed her mother's life 10 years prior had also left its permanent mark across Clara's left cheek and neck, a twisted landscape of pink and white tissue that no amount of high collars could fully conceal. "Clara, there's a rider coming." Her father shouted from inside the house, his voice weaker than it had been even a month ago. The consumption was taking him quickly now. She squinted against the dying sunlight, making out the lone figure approaching on horseback. Even from a distance, she recognized Ethan Sawyer's broad shoulders and the distinctive way he sat a horse like he'd been born in the saddle. Most cowboys passed through Sweetwater, Wyoming territory, staying just long enough to drink away their wages before moving on to the next cattle drive. But Ethan had arrived 3 seasons ago and hadn't left, taking work where he could find it and spending most evenings playing cards at the Silver Dollar. Clara stepped back into the shadows of the porch. Ethan had never been unkind to her, unlike some of the other men in town who made sport of her appearance. But she couldn't imagine what business would bring him to their isolated ranch so close to nightfall. He dismounted with fluid grace, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Evening, Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice carrying that slight Tennessee drawl that distinguished him from the local Wyoming men. "I was hoping to have a word with your father if he's receiving visitors." Clara nodded stiffly. "He's having a good day today. Please come in." She led him into their modest home, where Thomas Jenkins sat propped up in a chair near the fireplace, a blanket across his lap despite the mild spring evening. The house was clean but sparse. They'd been selling off furniture and valuables for months to pay for medicine. "Mr. Sawyer," her father said, extending a trembling hand. "What brings you to our door?" Ethan took the offered hand gently. "Sir, I've come with a proposition. I've saved nearly every dollar I've earned these past 3 years. I've got $800 and a claim on a promising parcel northeast of here. Good water, decent grazing land." Thomas Jenkins nodded. "Sounds like you're setting up properly. Many men never manage that much." "Yes, sir, but I find myself in need of a wife." Clara, who had been standing quietly by the doorway, felt her breath catch. She turned to leave the men to their conversation clearly. Her father would know of some suitable young woman in town when Ethan's next words stopped her cold. "I'd like your permission to marry your daughter, sir." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Clara couldn't bring herself to turn around, certain she had misheard. Her father cleared his throat. "Mr. Sawyer, I'm not sure you understand what you're asking." "I understand perfectly, sir. I'm 28 years old. I've worked hard, saved my money, and now I want to build something that will last. I need a partner, not an ornament." Clara finally turned, her expression guarded. "Mr. Sawyer, there's no need for charity. We're managing." Ethan's eyes met hers directly. They were a clear hazel, honest and unwavering. "It's not charity, Miss Jenkins. I've watched you in town. You're practical, hardworking, and you've kept this ranch going despite everything. Those are qualities worth more than a pretty face that can't bake bread or mend clothes." Her father studied the young man carefully. "Clara deserves someone who genuinely cares for her." "I respect her," Ethan said simply. "Genuine affection can grow from respect. Many marriages start with less." Clara found her voice at last. "And what happens when you tire of people's stares and comments? When you realize you've tied yourself to the town's ugliest woman?" Something flashed in Ethan's eyes, not pity, but something fiercer. "Miss Jenkins, I've buried 2 brothers and my parents. I've survived a war, a bullet wound, and more empty-bellied nights than I care to count. I'm not concerned with the opinions of men who have never known real hardship." 3 days later, Clara stood beside Ethan in the small church at the edge of town. Her wedding dress was her mother's, hastily altered the night before. Only her father, the preacher, and 2 witnesses were present: Ethan's friend Michael from the cattle company and Mrs. Wilson, who ran the boarding house where Ethan had been staying. The ceremony was brief. Clara's hands trembled as Ethan slid a simple gold band onto her finger purchased, she suspected, with money he couldn't really afford to spend. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan placed the gentlest of kisses on her lips, his hand steady at her waist. Outside the church, Clara noticed a group of well-dressed men standing by the general store across the street, watching. She recognized Harold Billings and James Montgomery, owners of the bank and the mining company respectively. They were laughing, not bothering to disguise their amusement at the sight of Ethan and his new bride. "Sawyer's gone and married the Jenkins girl," one called out, loud enough to be heard. "Must be after that worthless patch of land. Or maybe he's just desperate enough to bed anything that'll have him." Another replied, generating more raucous laughter. Clara felt herself shrink inward, but Ethan's arm around her waist remained firm. He guided her toward the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion, helping her up before climbing in beside her. "They're not worth your thoughts," he said quietly as he took up the reins. "We have a home to build." The home was little more than a one-room cabin on his land claim, with a lean-to stable for the horses. Clara had known it wouldn't be much. Her father's ranch had been modest even before they began selling things off to survive, but seeing the rough-hewn walls and dirt floor still gave her pause. "It's not much yet," Ethan said, watching her face carefully. "But the roof doesn't leak, and I've got lumber cut to put in a proper floor next week. By winter, we'll have a second room added on." Clara nodded, setting down her small trunk of belongings. "It's a good start," she said, and meant it. A blank canvas in its way. That first night as husband and wife was awkward but not unkind. Ethan was gentle, considerate even, though passion was notably absent. Clara had never expected to experience marital relations at all, had resigned herself to spinsterhood years ago. This arrangement, she reminded herself, was practical for them both. If it lacked romance, well, romance was for prettier women. The following weeks established their routine. Clara rose early to prepare breakfast while Ethan tended the animals. They worked side by side during the day, building fence lines, preparing garden beds, making improvements to the cabin. In the evenings, after a simple dinner, Ethan would sometimes read aloud from one of the 3 books he owned, or they would sit in companionable silence as Clara mended clothes and Ethan worked on leather repairs. They rarely spoke of personal matters. Clara learned that Ethan had fought for the Union despite being from Tennessee, that he had drifted west after the war, and that he could read and write better than most cowboys. He knew that she had lost her mother to the fire that scarred her, that she could make soap and candles from scratch, and that she kept meticulous household accounts. It was a partnership built on practicality and proximity, not passion. The first real shift came 6 weeks into their marriage. Clara had ridden into town for supplies, something she dreaded but couldn't always avoid. As she loaded purchased goods into their wagon, she overheard familiar voices from the alley beside the general store. "Sawyer's welcome at the card table, but keep that wife of his at home," James Montgomery was saying. "Frightens the ladies, that face of hers." "Can't imagine what he's thinking," replied another voice she recognized as Harold Billings. "Man could have had his pick of girls if he'd waited. Must be desperate between the sheets to settle for that." Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation as she hurried to finish loading the wagon. She was climbing up when a hand on her arm stopped her. She turned to find Sarah Montgomery, James's wife, looking at her with an expression somewhere between pity and contempt. "Clara," she said, her voice saccharine, "the ladies' auxiliary is meeting next Tuesday. We thought perhaps you might want to contribute something. Your mother's preserve recipe was always so unique." Clara knew an ambush when she saw one. "I'm afraid I'll be busy at the farm, Mrs. Montgomery, but thank you for the invitation." Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, I'm sure your husband keeps you very occupied. Though I can't imagine why he would." The comment struck like a physical blow. Clara managed to climb into the wagon and set off toward home, tears blurring her vision. She had long grown accustomed to cruelty regarding her appearance, but something about it touching on her marriage on Ethan cut deeper than expected. She was still upset when Ethan returned from checking their small herd of cattle. He took one look at her red-rimmed eyes and set down his tools. What happened? He asked simply. Clara shook her head. Nothing I'm not used to. Ethan stood there for a long moment, then crossed to where she was aggressively kneading bread dough. Clara, he said quietly, tell me. The gentleness in his voice broke something in her. The story spilled out the overheard conversation, Sarah Montgomery's barbed invitation, all of it. When she finished, she kept her eyes fixed on the dough, unable to look at him. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know this isn't what you bargained for. Ethan was quiet for so long that she finally looked up. The expression on his face startled her, not embarrassment or resignation, but anger, cold and focused. You have nothing to apologize for, he said finally, but I think it's time we paid a social call to town together. The following Sunday, Clara found herself dressed in her best dress, the blue one she'd made just before her father's death, riding beside Ethan in their freshly painted wagon toward the church in Sweetwater. She was terrified, but something in Ethan's quiet determination steadied her. They arrived just as most of the town was gathering for services. Ethan helped her down from the wagon with deliberate formality, then offered his arm as they approached the church steps. Clara was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers, the way conversations stopped as they passed. Near the church entrance stood the Montgomerys and the Billings, along with several other prominent families. Ethan guided Clara directly toward them. Good morning, he said pleasantly. Beautiful day for worship. The group murmured polite but cool responses, several of the women failing to hide their discomfort at Clara's proximity. Mrs. Montgomery, Ethan continued, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby. I wanted to thank you for your kind invitation to my wife. Unfortunately, we've been quite busy improving our property. The new well is producing excellently, and we've just completed the addition to our home. Sarah Montgomery's smile was stiff. How industrious, indeed, Ethan agreed. Clara has transformed our home beautifully. You ladies should come for tea sometime. Clara makes the finest apple preserves in the territory. A family recipe, I understand. Clara stood frozen, hardly believing what was happening. Ethan's hand at her waist was warm and steady. Perhaps another time, Sarah replied, her discomfort evident. Of course, Ethan said smoothly. Although I should mention, I've just received word that my uncle's investment in our cattle operation has come through. We'll be expanding significantly, which means we'll be opening accounts at the bank. He nodded to Harold Billings. And we'll need lumber for the expanded barn. This to James Montgomery, who owned the sawmill along with his mining interests. The men's expressions shifted subtly. Business was business after all. We'd be happy to discuss terms, Billings offered, suddenly more cordial. Excellent, Ethan replied. Though I should mention my uncle was quite specific that Clara would be handling all the household and business accounts. She has quite a head for figures. I'm sure you gentlemen can appreciate a practical partner. With that, he guided Clara into the church, finding seats near the front. As the service began, Clara leaned slightly toward him. Your uncle's investment, she whispered, the corner of Ethan's mouth quirked up. My uncle died 10 years ago, but they don't know that. For the first time since their wedding, Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that felt dangerously like admiration, or perhaps even affection. The following weeks brought subtle changes to their relationship. Ethan began bringing Clara wildflowers he found while riding the property. Clara took special care with his favorite meals. They began to talk more in the evenings, not just about work and plans, but about books they'd read, memories from childhood, hopes for the future. The first time Ethan reached for her hand simply to hold it, with no practical purpose behind the gesture, Clara felt her heart skip. That night, when they retired to bed, their coming together held a tenderness that hadn't been there before. Afterward, as they lay side by side in the darkness, Ethan's fingers traced the line where her scars began at her collar. Does it hurt still? He asked quietly. Clara shook her head. Not physically, not for years. His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb gently stroking the ridged tissue. You're beautiful, Clara, she gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You don't need to say that. I'm not a man who says things I don't mean. His voice was serious in the darkness. Beauty isn't just smooth skin and regular features, it's strength, resilience. The way you move when you're working in the garden, the focus in your eyes when you're figuring the accounts. Clara felt tears gathering. Ethan, I didn't marry you out of pity or convenience, he continued. I married you because in a town full of painted dolls and empty heads, you were real. Substantial, someone who could stand beside me through whatever comes. He kissed her then, more deeply and passionately than ever before, and Clara felt something final unlock in her heart. Summer faded into autumn, and their small ranch began to show real progress. True to his word, Ethan had added a second room to the cabin, along with a proper wooden floor throughout. Their vegetable garden had produced well, and Clara had put up enough preserves to last the winter. The herd, while still small, was healthy and growing. Their trip to town became a weekly occurrence, partly out of necessity, partly as a quiet statement. Ethan made a point to proudly escort Clara everywhere, his hand often at the small of her back or holding hers openly as they walked down the main street. The whispers continued, but they were changing in nature. The real turning point came in early October. Clara was examining fabric at the general store when she overheard two women talking one aisle over. They say he turned down Abigail Peterson last week, one woman was saying. Can you imagine? She's the prettiest girl in the county. Well, have you seen the way he looks at that wife of his? The other replied. My Thomas never looked at me that way, even when we were courting. Makes you wonder what she does to keep him so besotted. I heard from Sarah that they're doing well with that ranch of theirs, too, expanding already. Clara felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. Besotted. Ethan. The thought was so foreign that she nearly laughed aloud. That evening, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset, Clara recounted what she'd overheard. To her surprise, Ethan didn't laugh. Is it really so hard to believe, he asked quietly, that I might look at you with admiration, with desire? Clara felt her cheeks warm. I thought we had an understanding, a partnership. We do. Ethan took her hand, his calloused thumb rubbing circles on her palm. But partnerships can grow into more, can't they? She studied his face in the fading light. Are you saying that you? I'm saying that I wake each morning grateful that you're beside me, he said carefully. That I find myself thinking of you when we're apart, that I'm proud to call you my wife, for reasons that have nothing to do with convenience or practicality. Clara felt tears threatening. I never expected this, she whispered. Any of it. Ethan smiled then, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. Neither did I, but I'm glad for it, Clara, truly glad. Winter arrived early that year, bringing heavy snow by mid-November. Clara and Ethan settled into the cozy routine of the cold months, early mornings tending livestock, days spent on indoor projects, evenings by the fire. With the addition of the second room, they had space for a proper sitting area where Clara sewed and Ethan carved or read aloud. Word reached them that Clara's father had taken a turn for the worse. They hitched the team to the sled and made the difficult journey through the snow to the old Jenkins ranch, now being managed by a cousin who had come from back east. Thomas Jenkins was barely conscious when they arrived, his breathing labored and shallow. Clara sat with him through the night, Ethan beside her, his arm steady around her shoulders. When her father passed just before dawn, it was Ethan who held her as she wept, who helped prepare the body, who made arrangements with the preacher. The funeral brought nearly everyone from town, including the Montgomerys and Billings. To Clara's surprise, many of the attendees expressed genuine condolences, treating her with a respect that had been absent before. Several of the women approached her directly, offering food and company in the days ahead. They've changed their tune, Clara remarked to Ethan as they prepared to leave the churchyard. Ethan helped her into the sled. People follow the lead of those with money and influence, and we've shown we can't be dismissed. Clara considered this. Is that all it is, our growing prosperity? Ethan adjusted the blankets around her before climbing in himself. Partly, but I think it's more than that. We've shown them a different kind of strength, one they didn't expect. As winter deepened, Clara discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled her with both joy and terror, joy at the prospect of building their family, terror at the thought of something going wrong, of losing the happiness she had so unexpectedly found. Ethan's response was immediate and overwhelming. He built a cradle by hand, spent hours carefully planning an expansion to their home for the following spring, and treated Clara with such tender concern that she sometimes had to remind him she wasn't made of glass. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach. "A wife I cherish, a child on the way, land of my own. It sometimes feels like a dream I'll wake from." Clara covered his hand with hers. "Not a dream," she assured him. "Though I understand the feeling." As the snow began to melt in early spring, Clara was surprised to receive a visitor. Sarah Montgomery arrived in a fine carriage, looking somewhat uncomfortable as she approached the cabin. "Mrs. Sawyer," she said formally, "I hope I'm not intruding." Clara invited her in, curious about this unexpected call. Sarah perched awkwardly on one of their kitchen chairs, glancing around the modest but comfortable home. "I've come to extend an invitation," she said finally. "The Ladies' Auxiliary is organizing a spring social to raise funds for the new schoolhouse. We were hoping you might consider joining the planning committee. Your organizational skills are well known." Clara nearly laughed at the transparent attempt to curry favor. It was clear that the Sawyers' growing prosperity and Ethan's rumored connections with Eastern investors had elevated their social standing in town. "That's very kind," Clara replied evenly. "Though with the baby coming in summer, I'm afraid my time is limited." Sarah's eyes widened at the mention of the pregnancy. "Oh, we hadn't heard. Congratulations." "Thank you." An awkward silence fell. Sarah fidgeted with her gloves. "Mrs. Sawyer, Clara, I feel I should apologize for my behavior when you first married. It was unkind." Clara studied the woman carefully. The apology seemed genuine enough, if motivated by social calculation rather than true remorse. "We all make judgments too quickly sometimes," Clara said finally. "I would be happy to contribute some preserves for the social, though I can't commit to the committee." Sarah left shortly after, seemingly relieved to have completed her mission. When Ethan returned from town later that day, Clara told him about the visit. "So now we're respectable enough for the Ladies' Auxiliary," he said with a wry smile. "What a relief," Clara laughed. "I think she was genuinely shocked to see our home so comfortable. She probably expected dirt floors and unwashed dishes." Ethan pulled her into his arms. "Let them think what they will. We know what we've built here." What they had built became even more apparent as spring progressed into summer. Their cattle herd had doubled in size. The expanded garden flourished under Clara's careful tending. The addition to their house, a proper bedroom and nursery, was completed just in time. When their daughter was born in late July, a healthy, robust girl with Ethan's hazel eyes and Clara's determined chin, the Montgomerys and Billings were among the first to send gifts. A silver rattle from one, a finely crafted rocking horse from the other. "Trying to buy influence with our daughter already," Ethan remarked as they examined the expensive gifts. Clara, cradling little Emma in her arms, smiled. "Let them try. She'll have her father's good sense." "And her mother's strength," Ethan added, sitting beside them on the bed. His finger traced the edge of Clara's scar gently. "This is what I wanted to show them all along, you know, that true beauty, true worth, isn't what they think it is. It's this building something meaningful together." Facing challenges side by side, Clara leaned into him, their daughter nestled between them. "I used to dream of being pretty," she admitted quietly. "Of having a man look at me the way you do now. I never imagined it would happen." "I look at you this way because of who you are, not despite it," Ethan said. "Every line, every scar, they're part of the woman I love." By the time Emma was christened in the Sweetwater Church, the Sawyers had become one of the most respected families in the county. Their growing ranch employed 3 hands. Clara's preserves won ribbons at the territorial fair. Ethan's advice on cattle breeding was sought by ranchers who once wouldn't have given him the time of day. The rich men who had laughed at their wedding now competed for Ethan's business partnerships and Clara's social approval. But none of that mattered as much as the quiet evenings on their porch, watching the sunset with their daughter between them. 5 years after their wedding, as they celebrated with a picnic under the cottonwood trees by Sweetwater Creek, Clara watched Ethan playing with Emma and their 2-year-old son Thomas. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. Marrying me when you could have waited found someone else. Ethan looked up, surprise evident on his face. Regret the best decision I ever made, not for a single moment. He crossed to where she sat on the blanket, kneeling before her. His hands cradled her face, thumbs brushing over her scars with familiar tenderness. Clara Sawyer, I thank God every day that you said yes to a dusty cowboy with nothing but dreams and determination. We've built a good life, she acknowledged, leaning into his touch. The best life, he corrected, and we're just getting started. As the children raced around them in the dappled sunlight, Clara thought about the unlikely path that had brought them here from a desperate proposition to a love that had indeed shaken the foundations of Sweetwater society. Not through scandal or dramatics, but through the quiet revolution of proving that true value, true beauty, and true love often came in unexpected packages. The rich men had laughed, but Ethan and Clara Sawyer had built something far more precious than all their wealth, combined a partnership founded on respect that had blossomed into a love story that would be remembered long after the laughter faded away.